the most skilled pilot in the country, makes a princess fall in love with him days before the wedding. The world has been plagued by a long and bitter war between the Levum Empire and the Amatsukami Imperium, which are situated on the opposite ends of a vast ocean. In this world of warfare, Charles Carino is just a street urchin who is running away from some pursuers. He tries his best to give them the slip by running through the alleys, but ends up in front of a dead end, and that is where the boys pursuing him corner him. They begin beating him relentlessly and take what little money he has on him. There is just one simple reason for this hate crime committed by the boys. It is a fact that Charles is a bastard, a person of mixed blood. His father was from the Levum Empire, while his mother was from Amatsukami, which is why he is always on the receiving end of racial abuse. As he lies on the ground after being beat up, Charles looks at the sky, and the sight of majestic fighter planes flying high above him instills his heart with a desire to be free. He stretches his hand towards the sky, hoping to grasp it one day. Many years later, a grand party is being thrown for the Prince Carlo of the Levum Empire, who is visiting the small but prestigious Del Moral family that is situated near the Amatsukami territory. All the nobles at the party gather around the prince, talking about the long journey he took to come here for a special occasion. Suddenly, two military officers push through the crowd and present themselves before Prince Carlo. One of them salutes the prince as he introduces himself as Domingo, the commander of the Levum Empire's Eastern Battalion. While Domingo is eagerly talking to Carlo, the door behind them opens, and everyone's attention goes out as Princess Fana of the Del Moral family comes out. Carlo is left awestruck as he sees the ethereal beauty of Fana, and then her dad escorts her downstairs to meet the prince. As Fana greets the prince, he smiles and tells her that this is the moment he has been waiting for so long. Carlo begins reciting poetry to praise her beauty and then kneels down before her, asking for her hand in marriage. Everyone is pleased to hear this, and Fana looks at her dad for the final confirmation. As soon as he happily nods, she takes Carlo's hand and accepts his marriage proposal, surrounded by the applause from the guests. Carlo promises to keep Fana happy and to spread that happiness to their people too. However, he believes that it won't be possible as long as they are at war with the Amatsukami Empire. Carlo requests that Fana wait for just 1 year and promises that during that time he will defeat the Amatsukami and bring peace. Soon, Carlo departs in his regal helicarrier, and Fana's dad tells her that in 1 year, she will become the future empress of the Levum Empire, and their family will find stability and power. However, even after 1 year has passed, the war still goes on. One of Fana's maids rants about her fiancé's worthless promise, but the other maid believes that Prince Carlo will never forget his promise. He has been sending Fana letters daily, and both the maids agree that he is a kind and honest person. Despite their words, Fana feels nothing special about the prince. Soon, it is time for her to go to bed, and her servants take their leave. She just lies in her bed, unable to sleep, and then gets up to take some fresh air. She opens the windows and sighs as she looks at the peaceful scenery of her city. Suddenly, she spots the silhouette of some ships in front of the moon, and before she can fully process what is happening, the ships begin their assault. They drop bombs at the palace, destroying the buildings one by one. Fana is unharmed, but she notices that her father's residence is up in flames. She screams out to her dad when suddenly her maids come there and tell her to escape because the Amatsukami Air Force has attacked them. The maids forcibly drag Fana away from the window, and they fall to the ground just as some airships open fire on them. Everything in her room is riddled by bullets, and after being satisfied by their result, the Amatsukami airships retreat. Fana's servants arrive at the door to her room, or at least, whatever is left of it. They try to open the door while calling out Fana's name, and she strains to get up from underneath the two maids. She looks around to see the burning landscape that used to be a peaceful home just a few minutes ago. Desperation and grief grab her heart as she sees the ruins of her home and the servants trying to escape from the fire. Soon, a funeral is held for Fana's dad, and while everyone pays him their last respects with a heavy heart, the head butler talks with Commander Domingo, who reveals that the Amatsukami Air Force was targeting Princess Fana. He believes that by killing Fana, the Amatsukami forces will break the morale of the Levum Empire's troops. That is why Carlo has sent them a special mission to bring Fana to him instantly before any more attempts on her life are made. Domingo assures the butler that they will guarantee the princess's safety, and the old man is glad that Fana can finally be with her fiancé. Not far away from them, a young pilot of the Levum Air Force is being pursued by an enemy aircraft. He tries to get away from the enemy by abruptly changing directions, but his enemy is quite skilled, and even has a more advanced fighter plane, so he easily follows him. Seeing no other choice, the young pilot switches on the overboost mode of his plane and escapes into the thick clouds in front of him. He believes that he is safe now, but just as he comes out of the clouds, the enemy ship is behind him. It opens fire on the boy's ship, destroying it moments after he gets out of the cockpit. That was all just a dream that our hero Charles Carino was having, and he wakes up in a cold sweat. His friend Jock tells him to stop just lying in bed because the wake-up call was hours ago. As Charles gets up, holding his head, Jock realizes that he again had a nightmare about his plane being shot down. Charles has achieved his childhood dream of grasping the sky, and became a mercenary pilot affiliated with the Levam Air Force. However, the Amatsukami Air Force is more advanced than Levam, which is why he lost a fight earlier, and that has been causing him constant nightmares. Charles and his friend Jock go to have lunch after that, where Jock consoles him that he went against the most advanced fighter plane model of the enemies, which is dubbed as the new type, so it was obvious that he would lose despite his great skill. Jock remarks that even surviving after being shot down is a remarkable feat only someone like Charles could pull off. Suddenly, two men drop their dirty clothes on Charles's head, telling him to eat later and wash it first. Jock lashes out at them, and the boys ask why he is hanging out with the bastard scum. Jock is about to throw hands, but Charles stops him. He decides to wash the clothes because he is used to doing things like this. The two boys tease him, saying that he knows his place, and then Jock gets up to fight. Suddenly, a lieutenant comes there, looking for Charles. Charles salutes the lieutenant, who tells him to immediately come to the commander's office. As Charles follows after the lieutenant, the bullies from earlier are jealous that the commander has asked to see him personally. Once Charles is in the office, Commander Domingo reads his documents. He is as racist as anyone in this world, and calls Charles a bastard rat. He asks him how he survived in the streets. His two biggest guesses are stealing or begging. However, Charles tells him that at the age of 7, he came to the airfield for informal work and then learned how to fly by watching others. Domingo calls him a rat and a thief for stealing other people's knowledge with his eyes. But the lieutenant from before claims that Charles is their top pilot, both in name and in skill. Domingo then tells Charles that he has a mission to fly a member of a royal family from her country to the Levam Empire. He has to fly solo, without any guards, and the majority of his route will be over the sea. Charles claims that it may be difficult to cross the enemy lines alone, but he can make it possible. Domingo asks the lieutenant to bring a map and then asks Charles to explain what route he plans to take. Charles explains that he will take the shortest route and stop 3 times on the way to refuel his plane. However, if the enemy deploys the new type fighter planes, it would be difficult to escape them. The lieutenant reveals that for this mission, he is going to fly the latest model sea ship of their air force. He explains that the Santa Cruz model is the fastest ship in their fleet, which can reach speeds of over 600 kilometers per hour, which is not fast enough for the new type, but it is better than anything else. Charles is taken aback by this news, and then Domingo asks if he needs anything else. He explains that the Amatsukami Air Force may attack him the moment he crosses their border, but Domingo assures him that their entire fleet will act as a decoy for his safe departure. After this, he tells Charles that his mission is to escort Princess Fauna to her future husband, Carlo. Charles thinks this is too big of a responsibility for him, and remarks that the Special Fleet would be better suited for this job. However, the Special Fleet has already been wiped out, and that has been bugging Domingo all this time. He snaps, saying that if the news about the Special Fleet being wiped out spreads, the Levam Empire will become a laughingstock. That is why it is of utmost importance that Charles succeeds in bringing Fauna to a meeting point, from where the last surviving ship of the Special Fleet will bring her to the capital. By doing this, they will keep the princess safe, and also redeem the Special Fleet's reputation in front of the world. Domingo asks him if he can do that, and after thinking for a while, Charles accepts the mission. He is dismissed until further instructions, but Domingo is not happy that he had to entrust the life of the future empress in the hands of a bastard. Later that day, Charles's mercenary friends throw a party for him to get such a big mission, but he is quite uncertain about the mission. They assure him that if anyone can pull it off, it is him, and they promise that they will act as perfect decoys for him. The next morning, everyone gets ready for action, and Domingo explains the plan of action to them. After that, he tells everyone to be ready in their positions and asks Charles to follow him. Domingo tells Charles not to taint the princess by his presence and to only reply yes or no whenever she talks to him. He simply says yes in response to these insulting orders. Domingo then enters the room where Princess Fauna is waiting for her pickup and introduces Charles as the man in charge of flying her to the Levum mainland. Charles and Fauna stare at each other for a while, and he recalls that he once met her during their childhood. Domingo starts talking with the butler and others and sends Charles away. But before he leaves, the lieutenant tells him that there is a good luck gift for him in his plane. Charles thanks and salutes him, and then goes outside, where some mechanics are doing final touch-ups on the Santa Cruz. Charles admires it for a while, and then gets in the cockpit, where he finds a bottle of premium whiskey that the lieutenant has left for him. He suddenly hears the mechanics arguing with someone below, and finds that Fauna's maids are insisting on putting the heavy luggage they have packed for her safe trip. The mechanic tries convincing them that it will only make the flight slower, but the maids argue that these are all essentials that the princess cannot do without. The mechanic looks up to Charles, who has no choice and decides to keep all the luggage. Soon, Fauna also arrives there, properly wearing her safety gear. Domingo helps her to her seat, and she fastens the seatbelt as he closes the door. He then tells Charles that failure is not an option, before climbing down. Charles switches on the engine and checks that all the essential parts are functioning properly. The mechanics give him their approval and then remove the blocks they put in place to stop the plane from moving. Charles takes off with all the military men saluting his plane, while the maids wish their princess a safe journey. The plane lifts off from the runway, briskly passing over the beautiful city below it. Fauna takes one last look at the ruins of her house before the plane reaches above the sea. Charles contacts Fauna with the inbuilt phone and asks her to keep an eye out for enemies, and she agrees. With the sun rising behind his back, Charles flies ahead. Everything seems peaceful for now. He crosses over a group of small islands, notices a flock of whales swimming in the sea, and sees the birds flying high above the clouds alongside them. When the sun is about to set, Charles decides to park the ship over the sea for the night. After he lands the ship safely, he reaches out to Fauna and tells her that they will stay here tonight. Then he makes a small request of her. He brings all her luggage outside and asks her to throw away whatever isn't absolutely necessary for her. The princess stands there, gazing absent-mindedly at her luggage, and Charles explains that while the Santa Cruz is a fast plane, it will become slower the more weight it carries. He tells Fauna that if the plane becomes slow, it will be shot down by the enemies. She understands now and begins checking what to throw and what to keep while Charles minds his ship. Suddenly, one of the suitcases slips, and in trying to catch it, Fauna falls down. Charles turns to her as he hears a splash and finds the girl latching on to the landing gear of the plane. She slips from there too, and as she starts drowning, Charles dives after her. He grabs her, takes off her armor, and then carries her back to the surface. After she is done coughing up the seawater, Charles inquires if she is fine now. She apologizes for making a mistake earlier, and he tells her to be careful. Suddenly, he notices an enemy fleet approaching them and asks Fauna to get inside the ship. She is worried about her luggage, but Charles tells her to forget that and get back to her seat. She obeys, and Charles takes off. The dumb princess has not even closed her window, and she panics silently as her luggage falls off. Soon, Charles hides his plane behind some rocks, and the enemy fleet goes away after finding nothing. He then switches on the charging mode and explains to Fauna that the ship recharges by filling its tank with ocean water. It will take all night for the tanks to be full, and then they will be ready to depart for the flight tomorrow morning. Fauna suddenly starts shivering, and Charles realizes that their clothes are still wet from the dive earlier. He says that they should change, but Fauna tells him that all her clothes are lost now, so they have no choice but to let her clothes dry on the propeller while they decide to have their dinner on an inflatable raft. Fauna once again apologizes for causing him trouble, but Charles tells her that it is no big deal. He then heads to sleep inside the plane, and Fauna is concerned about it being too cramped. He assures her that he is used to it, and then asks her to switch off the burner before she goes to sleep. Charles returns to the cockpit and begins looking at the map, while Fauna turns off the burner and starts staring at the sky because she can't sleep. She begins humming a tune, and Charles remembers hearing that song before. The next morning, Charles packs the raft inside the luggage compartment and then takes off again. Another day passes peacefully, but as the sun begins to set, Fauna notices enemy ships in the distance. Charles immediately takes action and dives into the clouds for cover. The enemy ships begin moving away, and Fauna believes that they didn't notice them. Charles believes that too, and he thanks her for being vigilant. However, this creates many doubts in his mind. He believes that it is unusual for the enemy fleets to be in this area. he begins doubting that the enemy has an idea about them taking this route. Fauna asks him what will happen if the enemy knows about them, and he tells her that they will send the fearsome new type planes after them immediately. He clearly tells the princess that if the new types come here, they will have no chance of surviving. Fauna is nervous to hear that, and when Charles asks her if she knows how to use the gun in front of her, she replies with a no. Charles believes that their chances of survival are getting even slimmer now, but he is confident that no information about their top-secret mission has actually been released to the enemies. Later, as they take a break, Charles calculates that they will reach the Cyan Island the day after tomorrow, which is his destination. Fauna asks him if he is not taking her to the capital, and Charles tells her that he is not supposed to receive the glory of escorting her safely. He will just bring her to Cyan Island, from where the last surviving ship of the Special Fleet will take her, and they will return victorious to the capital. Fauna asks Charles if he is okay with someone else taking credit for his work, and he replies that he is going to be very well compensated for it. He tells Fauna that he is not even a regular pilot, but a mercenary, and for mercenaries, money is the most important thing they can get out of a job. Charles says that he will earn enough money to last a lifetime after this mission, and then he will stop being a mercenary and live a peaceful life on some island. Fauna is not entirely sure about this, but she just nods. Suddenly, Charles hears something, and he quickly turns off the burner. He climbs back to his plane and takes out his binoculars, scanning the night sky with them. Fauna asks him if there are any enemies nearby. He replies that there are enemies at a distance, but they are not coming towards them, so they should be fine if they stay silent. However, the enemy ships seem to be searching for something in the water, and Charles believes that something is not right. Fauna nervously asks Charles if it is possible that the Anatsukami Air Force managed to intercept a coded telegram. Charles believes that their army won't make such a silly mistake, but then Fauna informs him that Prince Carlo sent her a letter. In the letter, Carlo expressed his frustration that a member of the royal family was going to be crammed into a tiny plane and flown across the ocean without a guard. Charles sees no problem with that, but when Fauna tells him that it was sent through the military's radio telegraph, he freaks out, because that message must have been much easier to intercept. He is so frustrated that he doesn't even look at Fauna and climbs on the tail of his plane. He begins complaining that dozens of his friends risked their lives to act as decoys for his safe escape, but it might have been for nothing. He curses the idiot prince for not having a shred of common sense and then hits the plane before squatting down. Fauna tries to tell Charles that the prince was just worried about her, and Charles yells at her, asking if being worried about his future bride gives the prince the right to jeopardize the lives of his soldiers. Fauna still tries to say that the prince just wanted to reach her quickly, but Charles is not going to accept that. He lashes out, asking her if Carlo is an idiot who doesn't know that telegraphs can be intercepted. Fauna can only flinch at his remarks, and a long, awkward silence follows. Charles takes a few long breaths and calms down. He tells the princess that it does not mean that their mission is over. He tells her that they still have a chance to survive, thanks to her ability to spot enemy planes. Fauna is happy to hear that, and Charles says that if they can spot the enemy planes before they locate them, escaping from them will be easy. So he asks Fauna to keep trying her best for her own safety. With that, Charles tells her that they should get some rest now. He apologizes for his rude outburst earlier and then hands over Fauna's blanket. As she begins walking to her spot, she suddenly gets an idea and hurries towards Charles. However, she is really clumsy and slips once again, falling right into the sea. Charles quickly jumps after her and succeeds in rescuing her. He asks her what she was even thinking as they warm their bodies over the burner fire, and Fauna apologizes. She says that she just wanted to ask him to sleep in a better place, because that would ensure that he stays in peak form for the rest of their journey. Charles assures her that staying in the cockpit is fine enough for him, and then jests, saying that it is good that he wasn't sound asleep when the princess fell in the water. Fauna then starts talking about how she could see the sparkling blue ocean from her window. She always wanted to see it from up close, but now she remarks that this is not how she thought it would go. Charles teases her, saying that drowning is the closest she can get to the sea. Fauna is embarrassed now, and seeing her expressions, Charles bursts out laughing. She joins him, and after laughing till she tears up, she remarks that it seems like they have met before too. While Charles doesn't tell her anything, he silently stares at his coffee, thinking about the past. He used to work in the gardens of Fauna's family, but it was more that he got beat by the other gardeners there. They were not happy about working with a bastard like him and cursed him and his mother. Charles could only cry after being beaten and insulted, So he went to sob in the shade of some trees, where the young and innocent Fauna found him. She asked him if anything bad had happened to him, but Charles quickly wiped his tears and hid his face, telling her that he was not crying. Fauna immediately ran away and then returned with some flowers. She presented them to Charles, who hesitantly took them, and Fauna smiled at him. She told him that the flowers are always tied to the earth, but they always look at the wide and free sky while they bloom. Fauna ran back as her maids called her, and cheerfully waved at Charles. That little meeting left a lasting impression on him. He smiles at himself as he recalls that, and then suddenly falls asleep. Fauna notices this, so she takes the coffee mug out of his hand and drapes him properly before taking a seat by his side. She keeps staring at him gently and softly calls out to him to see if he wakes up. She falls asleep while looking at him, and soon, the next day comes. As they ride ahead, Charles tells Fauna that they are approaching the area called the Great Falls, which is the most heavily guarded enemy location. He asks Fauna to keep alert, and she affirms. She keeps looking around, and then suddenly notices an oddly black patch among the clouds. She tells Charles about it, and he panics, but it is already too late. A giant Amatsukami warship bursts forth from among the clouds, much to Fauna's horror. Charles tries to pick up speed, but then more warships surround his tiny plane from all sides. He realizes that they are screwed now, and his doubts about the enemies having information about their mission come true. Fauna is also terrified for her life, and then suddenly, the enemy ships shoot missiles at them. Charles quickly dodges and flies away, but the missiles keep homing in on his ship. Fauna tries to tell him about that, and he tells her that he doesn't need a live commentary on the situation right now. He advises her to hold tight and not speak much, or she may bite her tongue. He nosedives towards the sea, and at the last moment, he changes the course of his ship. The missiles enter the water and explode there, creating a ton of mist and steam, using which, as a cover, Charles flies ahead. However, there are more missiles behind them. Charles notices that the enemy ships are right above them, so he speeds towards them, and the missiles follow. The enemy ship opens fire at his ship, and Charles somehow dodges everything. The bullets blast some of the missiles, but many are still alive. Charles reaches dangerously close to the warship, and then changes his direction at the last moment again. He swerves around the ship and apologizes to all the people on it before the missiles hit them. He flies upwards as the Amatsukami ship below him bursts into flames and explodes. Fauna is horrified by the sight of the burning plane and the soldiers screaming as they fall down. In the meantime, Charles takes his ship above the clouds, but a barrage of gunshots approaches towards them. The bullets hit the ship, and blood splattered everywhere. Fauna panics and asks Charles if he is alive, but despite his injuries, he can only focus on the enemy troop. His worst fears have come true as the new types have joined the enemy fleet. With multiple warships and the fastest fighter planes behind him, and the rapidly worsening weather, the situation is already bad, but then Charles begins losing consciousness from the blood loss. The ship starts descending rapidly, and Fauna yells at Charles to hold it together. The new types begin firing at her, and she is terrified. In desperation, Fauna looks at the gun in front of her and aims at a ship. She hesitates because she has not harmed anyone before, but then pulls the trigger after begging God for forgiveness. However, nothing happens even after she pulls the trigger, and Fauna freaks out. The enemies are about to open fire again when Charles suddenly regains control over himself and activates the overboost mode. The ship flies ahead, but the Amatsukami pilots give chase. They keep firing at Charles's ship, but he skillfully dodges them. Suddenly, he hears Fauna crying and saying that she cannot do anything properly. Charles promises that he will protect her, and then asks her to keep talking to him so that he doesn't lose consciousness. Fauna tells him to do his best and reminds him about his dream to retire and live a peaceful life after collecting his reward. He replies that it was never about the money. He says that until now, all his missions were to kill the enemy, but for the first time, he was given a mission to save someone's life. Charles claims that he wanted to do a mission he could be proud of, even if it was just once. He keeps dodging enemy fire skillfully, and even the Amatsukami pilots recognize that he is one hell of a pilot. Suddenly, they receive commands from the main battleship to retreat because they cannot risk going too far away from the fleet. The pilots still keep pressing forward to save their egos, while Charles tells Fauna that he loves flying. He talks about how everyone is free in the wide sky, despite their background. Soon, the captain of the Amatsukami fleet issues a strict order for his team to retreat, and they obey him, although begrudgingly. Fauna is happy and relaxed as she sees that the enemy has stopped chasing them, and soon, the weather also clears. Their airplane has almost reached the Great Falls, but it heads straight towards it. Fauna looks back to find Charles dozing off, and she wakes him up, telling him that they are going to crash. Charles is startled, but despite his injury, he takes control of the ship and flies upwards. It is proving difficult to control the ship with just one hand, and he almost crashes into a rock. However, Charles manages to overcome all obstacles in his path and safely arrives atop the majestic Grand Falls. Fauna keeps cheering him on, saying that they are almost there, and asking him to keep trying his best. Soon, Charles lands his ship near an island, and after the rough landing, Fauna looks around to find that he is passed out. She quickly gets out of her seat and checks up on him. She finds that he is really injured, so she drags him out of the plane onto the island. After that, Fauna lays him to rest under a tree and goes back to the ship to find something to help him. She first washes Charles's wound with clean water and then dabs it up with a cloth soaked in alcohol. Charles flinches, but Fauna keeps on administering first aid to him with determination in her eyes. By the time evening arrives, she has successfully cleaned his wounds and bandaged him. He is unconscious but still suffers from some painful strokes and has trouble breathing, and Fauna just holds his hand to comfort him. Night comes, and Charles finally opens his eyes to Fauna singing a song while holding his hand. He closes his eyes immediately upon feeling relief that the princess is safe, and she continues singing. The next day, Charles wakes up with his body aching all over. Suddenly, Fauna comes there to greet him, only wearing her undergarments as her clothes dry. Charles panics upon seeing her like that, but even then, he only comments that her hair looks short. Fauna tells him that they were in the way, so she cut them. She asks him if they look good, and he affirms before getting up and walking to his ship. He notices the damage to the ship's body from the gunshots and thinks that he should move it somewhere safe to repair it. Fauna asks him to let her help too, and when Charles expresses surprise, she asks him if she is supposed to sit back and relax while an injured person does all the work. Charles can only smile at her, and soon they begin working on the ship. While Charles repairs the engine, Fauna cleans the blood on the window. Charles then takes out a spare window pane and replaces the one that was damaged by gunshots. Later, he covers the ship with leaves to hide it from enemies, and then starts roasting some fish he caught. As he and Fauna are happily chatting, he hears the sound of enemy ships and instantly puts out the fire and hides under the trees. After the enemy plane leaves, they head deeper into the island, crossing a thick patch of trees and spotting the weird monkeys living there. Soon, they come to a field of flowers, and Fauna cannot hide her excitement at seeing them. She frolics among the flowers, and seeing her laugh so carefreely reminds Charles of the meeting in their childhood. Later, they sit at the edge of the cliff and enjoy the sunset and the cold breeze as Fauna hums a song. Charles talks about the song, and Fauna tells him that a maid who worked at their house taught it to her in her childhood. Charles tells her that his mother also used to sing the same song to him each night before going to bed. He tells Fauna that he and his mother used to work for her family. As she hears the details, Fauna realizes that Charles is the son of the same maid who taught her the song. Later, she dresses his wounds, and Charles asks her if she still remembers what his mother told her. Fauna replies that she remembers it well. When she was little, she had trouble sleeping in the dark, but then Charles's mom would secretly slip into her room and sing her a lullaby. Then one day, Fauna's father found it out, and he angrily banished Charles's mom from his house. Fauna blames herself for that, and Charles tells her that his mom never thought ill of her. Fauna asks him if his mom is doing well, and Charles sadly tells her that she passed away soon after leaving the mansion. The princess is brought to tears by this revelation, and with a trembling voice, she tells Charles that his mother taught him how to be kind. She begins mourning her, and Charles tells her that his mother must be smiling as she watches over them. He comforts her, saying that she should not cry till she reaches the capital. Fauna stops crying and tells him that she doesn't want to go to the capital. She declares that she wants to continue flying in the sky and asks Charles to take her away with him. He stops her and then tells her that he cannot do that because everyone wishes for her to safely reach the capital. Fauna angrily asks him if no one cares what her wish is, and when he doesn't reply, she pouts and picks up the bottle of whiskey. She starts gulping it, even though Charles asks her to stop. He asks her to give him the bottle, but she runs ahead and drinks some more before asking Charles what does it matter to him. She is starting to get drunk now and calls him a coward, saying that just yesterday he was talking about how status and background don't matter in the sky, but now he has changed his statement. She calls him an idiot and says that he can't even compare to Prince Carlo, who is handsome and honest. Charles tells her to stop fooling around, but Fauna doesn't even realize that she is under the influence of alcohol. She asks Charles to dance with her, and he politely declines. He makes the excuse that he is not a noble and has never learned to dance, but that gives Fauna an idea, and she declares that she will teach him how to dance. She grabs his hand and drags him along, swinging around with him even as he begs her to stop. Suddenly, they trip, and Charles ends up falling on top of Fauna. They stare intently into each other's eyes, and then Charles dismisses all the thoughts coming to his mind and helps Fauna up. She starts stumbling and leans against him, and then suddenly starts crying while hitting him. Charles is confused by her actions and can't even understand what she wants. Later, Fauna falls asleep, and Charles watches over her, humming the same song and gazing at the stars in the night sky. At dawn, they remove the leaves covering their plane, and Fauna nervously tries to apologize to Charles for what she did last night. Charles doesn't even let her complete her apology and remarks that they have good cloud cover today, so they should take off together one last time. Fauna is not happy to hear that this is going to be the end of their journey. Soon, they take off, and Charles tells Fauna that they will reach Cyan Island by afternoon, and they will go their separate ways from there. She asks him if he is okay with that, and he replies that right now, all he can think about is reaching their destination safely. He believes that they may still meet some enemies, so they must prioritize their survival for now. Fauna thinks about his words and then suddenly asks him to teach her how to use the gun. She explains that she tried using it yesterday, but it didn't work. Charles tells her that the safety lock must have been on. Fauna starts looking for it, and thanks to Charles's instructions, she finds it and disables it. Charles is not so sure about letting a princess handle a deadly weapon, but she insists. So he asks her to fire only when he gives her the command, and she obeys. Charles tries convincing her that they will probably not even need to use the gun because the enemy won't find them, but apparently he jinxes himself. He can hear the voice of the enemy aircraft, but cannot figure out where they are from. He fears the worst and believes that they have been surrounded once again, but Fauna tells him that the enemy ships are to the left behind them. Charles immediately changes direction and gains some altitude, but the enemy ships follow him. Fauna keeps him updated about their number and direction, and he tells her that he will try shaking them off. He plunges into the clouds in order to escape, but two large helicarriers are already stationed above him. They open fire at him, and Charles barely dodges the first round of attacks. The onslaught intensifies, and along with cannons, the ships start raining bullets on him too, but Charles dodges everything. He turns on the overboost to fly ahead, but to his shock, two helicarriers are blocking his way. They also fire at him, and Charles takes a sharp turn at the last moment before their shots could hit him. With no way to go around the enemies, he decides to take a big gamble and heads straight at them. Fauna can only scream with her eyes closed, but Charles avoids all the bullets, squeezes through the tiny gap between the two ships, and reaches the safe zone. Fauna is relaxed, but then Charles tells her that they have another problem in front of them. This time, it is just a single fighter plane of the new type, and it is just hovering in front of them without making a move. Charles passes it by and notices the dog picture drawn on the ship. He instantly recognizes it as the fighter plane that shot his previous plane down and gave him nightmares. The pilot of the new type opens his window, and Charles tells Fauna that this is an old Amatsukami way to settle scores between fighter pilots. The Amatsukami pilot is challenging him to a duel, and Charles knows that this is their enemy's best chance to bring them down. After all, evading one highly skilled pilot is much more difficult than evading a fleet of mediocre ones. Charles tells Fauna that they will try to escape from him, and she agrees. On the other hand, the Amatsukami pilot gets ready for a duel and starts tailing Charles's ship. Charles drives through a patch of clouds, and as he comes into open air again, he finds that the enemy pilot is nowhere to be seen. Fauna notices him coming at them straight from the sky, and thanks to her instructions, Charles gets out of the way quickly. Fauna wonders why the enemy pilot is not shooting them, and Charles replies that he just doesn't want to waste ammo by shooting when they are not in his range. Charles puts all his efforts into outmaneuvering his opponent and does various tricks over the sky to get him to back out. Fauna is trying to aim at the enemy ship too, but the constant changes in their trajectory make it hard for her to keep the gun steady. Charles tries shaking the enemy off by nosediving towards the sea, but he doesn't even hesitate and follows him. Soon, the superior new type catches up to Charles's plane, and he has no choice but to change his direction once again. He heads straight up, and the Amatsukami pilot follows them, and that is exactly what Charles wants him to do. He heads straight in the direction of the sun and moves out of the way abruptly to blind his enemy. However, the enemy pilot was prepared for this, and he uses his superior technology to quickly stabilize his plane and chases after Charles, who had not anticipated him to react so quickly. He feels doomed now because the Emetsukami pilot is right behind him. The Emetsukami pilot takes aim at Charles's ship and puts his hands on the trigger, but to his surprise, Fauna has taken her aim too. Charles panics, weighing the morality of his next decision, but then yells at Fauna to start shooting. She presses the trigger, and immediately after that, the enemy pilot does the same. Both planes fire at each other and take some damage. While Charles's ship only gets grazed by the bullets, the enemy ship takes a few lethal shots to its wings. Soon, some rubble falls into the sea. Charles opens his eyes and turns around to see Fauna, awestruck by what she had pulled just now. However, even more amazing than that is the fact that the enemy ship is still flying after losing half a wing. Charles believes that this is thanks to the great skill of the pilot, and he takes his ship to fly parallel to his. The Emetsukami pilot realizes that he was defeated because he underestimated Fauna since she was a woman. He thought she would not fire at any cost, but she proved her wrong. Charles then salutes the pilot, who returns the gesture, and then they fly off to their destination with no one chasing them. Soon, Charles lands his plane at a location with a bunch of rocks and a ton of seagulls. That is the Cyan Island, which is the end destination for his mission. Charles tells Fauna this and says that now they just have to wait for the pickup team to come from the Levum Empire. Fauna is a bit upset by it. She sits down and begins gently touching the bullet holes on the plane's wings, wishing that she could take the Santa Cruz with her because she has bonded a lot with it. Charles tells the princess that she can proudly call herself a pilot now because she defeated an enemy. He tells her that for pilots, planes are their closest friends and family. Fauna replies that she could defeat the enemy only because he called her name in the end, and Charles nervously tells her that he thought they were going to die, so he panicked a bit. Fauna laughs at him and then says that she was finally useful. She then suddenly asks Charles to come to the capital with her, but he replies that it is not permissible. Fauna remarks that it is unfair, and he replies that the commanders can't let the world know that the one who saved the princess was not the special fleet, but a half-blood mercenary pilot. Fauna gets up and asks Charles to at least board her plane and come with her to be part of the celebrations, and he silently tells her that he won't get his reward in that case. Fauna suddenly grabs his shoulders and asks him if he didn't say this job was not about money. Charles tries to come up with some excuses, and Fauna yells that he is lying. With tears in her eyes, she asks him if he will be fine if he never sees her again. Her words hurt Charles, and he cannot come up with an answer, so he just hangs his head down. They stay like that for some time, not uttering another word that could add to their grief. Soon, Fauna's ride comes there, and Charles remarks that it is really befitting a princess. The giant helicarrier stops in front of them, and Charles tells Fauna that they will most likely stop him from stepping on the ship. The helicarrier descends and creates strong waves that rattle Charles's ship. He holds Fauna so that she doesn't lose her balance and fall into the sea like always. A motorboat is let down from the airship, and it quickly comes to get Fauna. Seeing that they only have a few seconds left together, Charles prays that Fauna's future is filled with happiness and fulfillment. He says that he would not have survived this journey if she were not there to watch his back. Fauna gets emotional and leans against him, saying that she would also have been dead without him. Charles controls his deepest urge to hug her and tells Fauna that she will always be his hope. She can only bear his words in silence until the boat arrives there. The captain immediately points his gun at Charles and tells him to get away from the princess. His men set up a platform to get on the ship, and the captain gets in between Fauna and Charles and then hits him in the face, telling him to know his place. Fauna screams as Charles falls down, but as she goes to check up on him, the captain stops her. His subordinates grab her and take her away as she tells them that she wants Charles to come with her too. However, one soldier throws a bag containing his reward to Charles, and the captain asks him to check the amount. He even insists that Charles do it quickly, so he opens the pouch and finds that it is filled with gold dust. The greedy captain bends down to check the amount and tells Charles that he is set for life with this. Then he quietly pockets 2 handfuls of the gold dust into his pocket, telling Charles to be thankful that he is not going to report that he was so close to the princess earlier. He threatens him that if anyone knows this, he will be shot on sight. Charles just sits there, looking gloomy, as Fauna tells him to chin up because he did things that no one else could. She keeps telling him that none of these greedy idiots can compare to him, and then the captain orders his men to get moving. the boat speeds away, and Fauna can only keep calling Charles's name. He stays in his position and raises his head only when he sees the helicarrier rising up. He looks at the bag of gold dust and then gets infuriated by his spinelessness. However, he takes one look at his ship and gets up. On the other hand, Fauna heads directly to the commander of the helicarrier, asking him how they could treat the hero who saved her life like a dog. She clings to him, asking if this is how the great Levum Empire behaves. The commander asks her to calm down, and then looks at the boat captain, who tries to act smug and says that the princess must have been deceived by the pilot. He says that while Charles may have acted noble in front of Fauna, he couldn't hide his greed when he saw the reward in front of him. Fauna is furious at him, but then suddenly, she notices Charles's ship flying past. She is overjoyed to see him, and asks the commander to let her say goodbye. The captain says that she should not cause any commotion now, and Fauna asks why she can't say goodbye to the person who saved her life. The captain acts smug, asking if the future empress is going to bring shame to her family by acting like this. Fauna is angry, and she simply ignores him and walks towards the door. The guards stand firmly in their positions, and she asks them to let her through. They don't obey her commands, and the cocky captain tells her that she doesn't have the power to command anyone until she marries the prince. He comes behind Fauna, telling her to be mindful of her current position, and asks her to come along quietly. However, she has had enough of his rambling and turns around, telling him to stand back. The captain is taken aback by her sudden outburst of confidence, and he stumbles down. Fauna walks up to him and stares at him, telling him not to overstep his bounds. Suddenly, the captain sees that the gold dust is pouring out of his pocket, and he panics as everyone sees it. He tries scooping it back in while saying that it isn't what it looks like. Fauna then goes to the guards again and sternly stares at them. Now the guards are sweating, but the commander asks them to stand aside. They are relieved upon receiving orders, and Fauna happily runs out. She crosses the various bridges inside the giant ship, almost bumping into various workers because she can't contain her excitement. She keeps running, and everyone is surprised to see a free-spirited girl like her. She soon reaches the rooftop, and after getting used to the fast winds, she looks ahead to see Charles's plane gliding next to them. He turns around and finds Fauna running on the ship's deck. Charles is happy and decides to greet her from up close. He flies parallel to her for a moment and then takes to the sky to perform various acrobatic tricks for her enjoyment. Fauna is amazed to see him do cartwheels in the air and waves to him. Charles flies close to the ship once again, and then suddenly, Fauna sees some gold particles flying right past her. Before she could understand what happened, a flurry of gold dust dropped from the sky, filling the surrounding area with its radiance. Charles takes out handfuls of the gold dust from his reward one by one and leaves them outside his open window, creating a dazzling phenomenon. The entire ship is showered with his graceful act, and all the workers begin cheering and whistling for him. Fauna walks to the edge of the ship and basks in the golden glory happily. She is overcome with emotions, but she accepts them gracefully and waves to Charles, thanking him for everything. He takes one good look at her and then smiles to himself before riding away into the vast blue sky, with Fauna watching him vanish from the horizon. As time passes, Princess Fauna devotes herself to becoming a bridge for peace between the Levum Empire and the Amitsukami Empire and etching her name in history. As for Charles Corino, no records exist after these events, as he completely disappeared from the army and the empire after completing his mission. The story of the pilot and the princess together seems to have ended, but what happened to the two of them after this remains unknown, so there is hope that they met each other again.